everybody who's joining us today. People will be joining here a little bit as they trickle in for the next couple of minutes. So I'll kick us off and just say, welcome everybody. My name is Jon Bell. I'm the Communications and Creative Director at AIA Colorado. So everything that members read, see, touch, just about anything that goes through our official channels, I usually have something to do. So I always like to start with an introduction to say if you've got anything to complain about or anything you'd like included, jon@aicolorado.org, please, anytime. But yeah, in this role, this event sort of comes about naturally because a huge part of this organization is to help architects be really great architects, and part of that is in sharing their stories with the wider world. So that's what we're talking about from project to publication. And so here's the event. If this is the event you're looking for, you're in the right place. Again, my name is Jon Bell. I'm with AI Colorado's Communications Creative Director. So we have a bunch of events coming up. The rest of this month, there's two more going to go online later today related to community and the environment, as well as another project tour in Denver. But you all found this event. This is a great place to get connected for more events coming up. We at AI Colorado do offer about 70 HSW learning credits. This discussion is not an HSW, but I think we're going to submit it for learning credits. So we'll be keeping track of attendance and all that kind of good stuff for at least a learning unit. But yeah, these events right here, please, sign up, attend, and join us as we move along through the month. We also have something big coming up here, and that's the awards. It's award season for us, and we have a submission deadline coming up soon, and that's right here. So it closes Friday, June 26th, and that does have to do with our conversation because there's something really cool when you're an awarded architect, and when you win awards, when either individual or as a firm for a project, it's a great way to help tell your story and share your great work with the world. So cannot recommend enough everybody who's going to join this call to yeah, brush off those photos, write your descriptions of your project, and get those submissions in by Friday 26th. That is a firm deadline. We have been pretty clear with those that those deadlines are firm. They don't move intentionally so that we can then get these in front of the jurors in the right amount of time, then get the submissions kind of ready to go so that the jurors can evaluate them, can award the projects, and we move forward. So again, that's a big thing coming up for us as well for marketing. And then another one, conference. You're an architect or you're someone working on something super interesting related to architecture, the call for presentations is open. Another great way to get the word out about who you are and what you're working on and the really great things that you're uncovering in Colorado that can help your fellow architects and the community at large. Here's a great opportunity. It's the call for presentations to present at our conference in November at Keystone. So again, these are fantastic opportunities through your AI Colorado to take part in the story, the bigger story of architecture here in the state. So as such, let's go into it. We're 4 minutes after the hour. I want to introduce our four, or let them introduce themselves, but our four esteemed people who are joining us today. I've invited four different experts to provide different perspectives about what it takes to be published or get into publications or share your story for your project or communicate with the wider world about your projects and who you are and what you're working on. So, Vanessa, let's start with you. You want to introduce yourself and what you're working on.
Sure. My name is Vanessa Kauffman Zimmerly. I'm the editor of Modern in Denver magazine. Our summer issue just came out on Monday, so I have been working on that pretty doggedly for the last few months, and now we're working toward fall and winter issues. But this issue is great. I hope that all of you can pick up a copy or read it online.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vanessa. And after the introductions, we're going to have individual conversations with each of our panelists before we come together as a group and answer some questions as well. So, Catie, you're next. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Catie Cheshire. I work at the Denver Business Journal covering commercial real estate. Been there since about August of last year. And before that, I worked at Denver Westward, so pretty long time in local Denver media.
Awesome. Thank you. Parker?
I'm Parker. I'm the founder and creative director of Developing Denver, and we're pretty much a social media based platform. Find us Developing Denver across all the socials.
Thank you. And Bryant?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bryant Palmer. My company is called Oh Hey Creative, and we are a PR and content marketing agency. And we specialize in real estate, arts organizations, and food and beverage.
Awesome. Well, I'm a big fan of all four of your work, and again, thank you very much for being here. But let's kick it off, Vanessa, with a little conversation about Modern in Denver. Again, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about Modern in Denver, and then we're going to kind of move around a little bit. But for those who are unaware, and starting with Modern in Denver, because you guys have been really great partners in the past with an awards spread and talking about architects and architecture from a really interesting lens. But how would you describe Modern in Denver? And like, obviously, what are the focuses of the publication?
Yeah. So Modern in Denver began 18 years ago. William Logan, our creative director, started it then. We think about Modern in Denver as a publication designed to inform, educate, entertain, and inspire. So we're looking at things in the built environment from residences to civic and commercial projects, landscape architecture, product design, furniture, contemporary art. And we try to really have a wide variety of articles that touch on these things in each issue. It is a print quarterly, so we come out with the seasons, and we cover primarily the Front Range and Denver, but more and more we're expanding into what people call the Mountain West, looking at what's going on in those places. In addition to kind of project-specific pieces, we also periodically will run stories about, new building technologies. We do a travel by design series every few issues where we go to a place and kind of report on what's going on, what the design characteristics or history of those places are. We try to engage architects in topics. Last summer, we did a piece about kind of like what's new in modernism, 100 years after modern architecture really hit the stage. So we're trying to take a really wide yet deep lens into design and creative practice.
And Modern Denver is more than just a publication. I just flipped over here to Design and Bloom. You do a lot of events and other kind of larger community projects. Can you tell us a little bit about the other things that Modern in Denver has going on?
Yeah, we do Design and Bloom every spring. It's an annual event where we invite architects and designers to make floral arrangements, testing out their concept, craft, execution in this new for them medium. And then those are all displayed at a big party that we throw. This year we threw it at Workplace Resource and Adorn. So we like to partner with kind of local design showrooms for this. I believe it first started as a way to get people into a new condo building where the realtor wanted people to see the various units. And William had this idea for drawing a crowd there through florals. And then in the past, for about 6 years, we produced Denver Design Week, which was a really large kind of survey of design every fall. And there would be dozens of different talks and studio visits and property tours and other events like this about design that, drew really large crowds across the region. So that was a lot of fun. And, in addition to that, we like to do things like this. We like to go to design critiques at the schools and just really be a part of that community dialogue. We think we talk about this a lot, like the idea of publication is not so much just a physical, book or magazine, but really this idea of making things public and bringing things to the public. So that's kind of a larger kind of ethos that we're trying to operate within.
Well, and that's an appropriate segue to highlight that Modern Denver was Impact Award winner from AIA Colorado last year. So kudos again to you and the team for that.
Thank you.
Let's dive in a little bit more granular. What makes a great architecture story for Modern in Denver? And I'm just going to flip over to a story that features land and shelter, just as backstory here. This is with Andy Korber, who's the current treasurer of the AI Colorado board. So there's a little tie-in, but maybe this story, maybe stories in general. What makes a great story for Modern Denver? What are you looking for in when you're telling a great story?
Yeah, I think this goes back to what I said at the beginning about like informing, educating, entertaining, or inspiring. But we really operate with the belief that design can and should solve problems. So this is something we're always looking for in an architecture story, beyond it being, a beautiful piece of architecture, like what problems is this design solving? That could be really, on the micro level of like for a family, or it could be something much larger about, affordable housing or climate resilience, new technologies, these sorts of things. So we are kind of looking for that really like extraordinary part of a story. Um, what makes it, appealing to us usually is that the designer can articulate that, and then that we know that that's something that we can convey to a larger audience through a narrative and then beautiful imagery, of course.
Okay. The designer articulates something, then you're taking and you're telling a story. I'm gonna, again, a little granular here. How do you
Yeah.
typically discover these projects? Someone has a great story to tell. How do they get, like, how do you get that conversation moving along?
Yeah. So there are probably 10 to 15 firms that we are just tracking all the time because we have longstanding relationships with them. They kind of keep us apprised of what's coming. I'd say even a few years out can be really helpful to us. And then we are always accepting submissions via email and through our online portal. And we review every submission, and we're kind of, looking for those qualifiers that I just mentioned. But I think, a big, big piece of it is that relationship building that we do over time with architects and designers. And, our hope is that people come to know us as more than just, email signature lines, and that they really do see the magazine as, humans who they can reach out to at any time with a project. So we're kind of just tracking. We like to plan editorial, a year to 18 months out, but we also always leave room to remain flexible and nimble if something really exciting comes into view on a little shorter time frame.
Okay, something comes into view, shorter time frame, 18 months in advance. What do you get that you're immediately interested in that you're like, oh, that is something we have to cover?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, like a real strong articulation of a point of view, whether that's like aesthetic or concept or a new and exciting material, or, an advancement in building science, these things that kind of really elevate the project and are clearly contributing to the field beyond just this project. I'd say that's another thing that we're really cognizant of is that while this might not be done in every single project, architects have a big responsibility to the built environment and to people's well-being. So, we really want to see that architects and designers are thinking in that way. They're trying to answer some of these bigger questions and solve these problems. Um, so those things for sure we're looking for. I might have gotten a little further off from your question. Can you say
Oh, it's
it
great.
again?
It's fantastic. I'm trying to get through, if I'm an architect working on a project I really am excited about, and it's 18 months until it's done or completed or in a state that's ready to show off, like what do I need to have ready to present to you? These are beautiful photos that I'm showing
Yeah.
of Andy Korber's kind of home and office that's in this most recent issue. These are beautiful photos. Obviously, everything's very well articulated. Like how baked does this product need to be? This article before it comes to you?
Yeah. So when a pitch comes through, we definitely look for that design narrative that can articulate this point of view. Really great photographs. And if those photographs don't exist yet, we like to know like when they will be taken and by whom, and if that will include media rights. We like to know if the homeowners, if it's a residence, if the homeowners are willing and wanting to participate, which isn't a deal breaker for us, but they certainly need to be okay with their home being published. So those kind of tactical things. We also like to know if there were any conflicts throughout the process among any of the contributors or collaborators, understanding that kind of relationality behind the scenes before a writer goes off and starts interviewing people is very important as well. And then also who the collaborators were. We touch a lot of parts of the industry, so it's good to kind of see how various subcontractors and tradespeople are plugging into these projects. But definitely one thing William and I talk about a lot is, or encouraging designers and architects, like for them to think about how a project might appear in a magazine spread, get them thinking about that pretty early on so that they can position the project in a way that we might also be able to see it in as publishers.
Okay. And we're gonna circle back to some pitfalls later on. So we're gonna keep with the positivity here, and I'm gonna move to you, Catie, and ask you a few questions a little bit about your role at the Denver Business Journal. And how does covering architecture and development differ from covering other business sectors?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of honestly the luckier sectors to cover because people have a tangible understanding of kind of the at least final product of most of it versus, my colleagues who cover startups, it's really difficult to explain things like that sometimes, and harder to make a connection. So I think what's great about architecture stories is people understand it sort of on an innate level. Like everyone, hopefully, in a good society, lives in a building and works in a building. So I think it's really something that people care deeply about, no matter who they are, or what job they have.
100%. And when you think about projects being newsworthy from a business journalism perspective, what are the things that jump out to you that comes across your inbox? You see the byline, you see the story, you're like, okay, we got to cover that. Like, what are those couple of moments that quickly tell you you're onto something?
Yeah, so we love numbers. So if you're willing to share, I had last week the project team behind the Waldorf Astoria condos going up in Cherry Creek. We're like, here's how many cubic yards of concrete we're going to be using, stuff like that that kind of gives detail is really helpful. And then for building projects, we typically will cover like when they start the development process, we keep track of the permits that get submitted to the city, when the project breaks ground, and when it's finished and open, we like to come revisit, take pictures with our photographer, that kind of thing. So any of those project stages are pretty much a go. And then stories like this one on screen, also the news about architecture firms, do you have a new office yourself? Are you doing something particularly innovative? Is there a trend that you're seeing that you think we should know about? Those kind of things.
Absolutely. So obviously we talked a little bit about like the kinds of things that catch your eye, but how important is scale and economic impact, community impact, or innovation when evaluating a potential story?
I would say huge. We, the bigger the better in terms of stories, but also I think there's ways to make more small community projects tell a really good story. Like if you talk to a resident next door to your project that you're building and they told you something that changed the design, even though that's a small scale community impact, it's actually a really interesting and cool story to tell. So I would say, don't be afraid if you think, oh, this is kind of small, but there's this interesting detail. Like I'm still always up for hearing those pitches.
Yeah, when thinking about those pitches, obviously it can come in a variety of different ways, but like, how do you like to receive a pitch? Like, what do you want to see? Like, what's the kind of thing if someone's going to reach out to you that you're like, ah, they thought about me. They presented it in a way that I can now do something with this.
Um, well, I have a weird spelling of my name, so if people spell it correctly, that's always a big plus for me. And I try and spell everybody's name correctly as well. So that's kind of more of a technical detail. But also, I think just making at least what you think is the headline really clear. Like, hey, in the first sentence, I'm going to understand what's the takeaway because there's actually been a few times, throughout my career where I read an email, read the first couple paragraphs, didn't find anything, and then, a week later, somebody circles back and they're like, "Did you notice this part?" I'm like, "No, I didn't because it was 10 paragraphs down." So, I love information and anything you can give, but I do think prioritizing what goes in the first few paragraphs is something really helpful for me because I probably get in my inbox 25 to 50 pitches a day, so it's a lot to go through.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question was the volume frankly, material you're working through every day. 25 to 50 pitches requires a pretty quick eye to pick up what's going on. What's your conversation like with your editors in terms of evaluating a story? How much do you feel like you're an advocate? How much do you feel like you're just kind of laying things out? Like, what's your maybe what's your internal rub like in terms of getting these stories published?
Yeah, so for the most part, I have discretion. If I'm unsure if a story is a fit, that's usually when I bring the editors in. And a lot of times, if I'm unsure, they agree with me. But there have definitely been times when I was like, I don't know if this is quite a fit, and they say, yeah, actually it is. And there's also been times when I literally get to like the drafting a story phase and they're like, why are you even working on that? That's not anything. But that tends to be pretty rare. So usually discretion lies with me unless there's a bit of a gray area.
And traditionally, obviously, there's a little bit of difference here between Denver Business Journal and Modern in Denver in the timeline we're talking about. Vanessa mentioned 18 months hearing about a project and doing something. Do you want to hear about something that's 18 months before the story, or do you want to hear something that's like ribbon cuttings next week? Like, where are you in the timeline of all of this?
So we have a pretty fast pace. We publish daily on our website and then we have a weekly print edition. So yeah, a week is usually good. Notice if there's an event of some kind, ribbon cutting, groundbreaking, anything like that. But I'm happy to know about projects. There's a couple companies that I'll meet with quarterly and just talk out what are you working on? And sometimes that looks like projects that are 18 months out. And it's still, good information for me to have, but I wouldn't start writing a story at that point.
Yeah. A lot of architecture projects have there's a bunch of partners a part of it. They're a I would consider it an extremely major voice in the project, but there's other partners, the developers and all kinds of people who are a part of it. How do you or how can an architect do themselves any favors in a story that might have, three or four or five or more interests in the story? How do they let their voice into your inbox as you're evaluating 25 to 50 pitches? How do they kind of get their company name or their part of the story to rise a little bit above in that mix?
Yeah, I would really honestly go back to what Vanessa was saying. If you are able to clearly articulate an innovation or how your work helped the project become different from other projects or set it apart, I think that is probably the best way to make that architecture voice stand out.
I have heard from several members in the past that it's always interesting, and not always, but occasionally, an article will get, the developer is the headline, and then it's like images rendered by, and it's like the architecture firm. And, like, again, I'm extremely biased in this. To me, we want to get the architects and the architecture voice more into the story. So that's really helpful to know, in addition to supplying the imagery, oftentimes, to also add a viewpoint, add the wrinkle that makes the architecture piece so fascinating into these stories.
Yeah,
Um,
I would say, a lot of times the reason we hear about stories is from the developers because they're kind of the ones typically organizing events around them. So if you are an architecture firm and you get asked for a rendering from a developer, feel free to say and pass along my contact info and, I can then shoot you an email because then I know. Or like you said, hey, and when you send this rendering, here's a quote if they want it. I would say that's always really welcome too. Yeah.
awesome. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to Parker here with Developing Denver. And thank you, Catie, very much. Okay, Developing Denver. Tell us, Parker, what exactly are you working on?
Yeah, I would say mostly we're a social based company, like I kind of mentioned before, and it's a lot of visual. I'm a very visual person. I've been a long time content creator, and when I was outside the CRE space, and so getting into it, I was like, how can I learn about these projects as simple as possible and show that to people as simple as possible without any voice or tone. So what I do a lot is I work through the permit system, probably similar to like what Catie does, where they track things that go in every day. Excel, as everyone knows, is kind of hard to navigate if you've never had any use on it. So trying to make that where it's like, how easy can I access that information? How easy can I put it on a video or a carousel and animate that and show someone who might not have any attachment to commercial real estate whatsoever? So that's usually my biggest focus is the transparency and the connection to the community.
So you mentioned before being in the space. Okay, so there's some sort of origin story here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was actually a professional dancer. I was a professional ballet dancer, and I got injured dancing and started doing content creation. And as like any content creator very on, people were like, "Will you make a video for me?" And I was like, "I sure will." And I had never done video. Then I started getting in. Can you do an animation for me? I sure will. And I never done animation. So taking all those skills after like probably 10 plus years getting into Instagram and social media early, I was kind of burnout from all the stuff I was doing before. And I really wanted to find something that if I woke up every day and no one read it at all, I'd be happy making it. And construction. I mean, I love construction. I love figuring out what projects on the corner, what's being built next. And so luckily that's translated to a huge audience. And I think other people are interested in as well. But yeah, it's definitely been a wild journey to go from dancer to full-time creator and creative director of a construction um, news company, pretty much.
Dude, I love stories like that. That's awesome. So you're making these videos. Obviously, they're everywhere. I just pulled up the Instagram account because that's probably the easiest thing people to anchor
Yes.
on. And you've grown it organically, telling really compelling stories. I learned quite a bit about what's coming just from your videos, so thank you for that. But who's your audience? Because obviously, like a bunch of architects here, but who else are you speaking to besides people kind of inside ball?
Yeah, yeah. We have about 100,000 active followers across all of our social media. And as cool as I think it'd be to have 100,000 architects in Denver, I unfortunately don't think that's the case. So when we break it down, it's a lot of there is a lot of development. There's a community. There's a lot of real estate community that follows along, but there's a lot of people who are just active in the community who want to have a voice outside of just like maybe their city council or even just like things they're not going to attend. This is easy as picking up the phone for them and commenting. You know, that gives them a voice and gives them power. So it's a weird mix. You know, it's a big part of the DMA. We have everything from the Front Range all the way over pretty much to the airport, up to Thornton, all the way down to Colorado Springs. And then it's again, it's a mix, but usually it's between I'd say that older generation, you know, people who are concerned about like what's being built in their neighborhood, what's being built on their corner, how they can get involved in that kind of thing. So we tend to see a slightly a little bit older audience above, 25, 30. But like I said, it's a unique audience. And unfortunately, we do have a lot of trolls that comes along with social media, so that part as well. So it's an interesting mix of people.
Yeah, man. Sorry about the trolls. Can't do anything about that these days, for sure. So, how has social media changed like the way that architecture projects gain visibility, in your opinion, from from your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. As an outsider at the beginning, and I necessarily don't like that, but as saying an outsider, but as someone who was coming in fresh to that, it kind of felt like the information was being held on by a group of people, and it was kind of hard to get a hold of, right? Like, how easy is it to access what's being built? It kind of feels like a secret. And so I think with social media and access to information nowadays, like there is people who want to find out things a lot faster, and they don't want the secret, and they want the transparency and the non-bias approach, especially in a world where we live in where social media is very biased. It's just kind of it's all that put together, right? So it's hard to nail it down into like one particular thing, but the transparency is probably the biggest part of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're clearly touching on something for sure. And obviously the videos are engaging and interesting. People can learn quite a bit. Oh, that's fantastic. So like what details, obviously from an architect's perspective, they want to put things in front of you that you want to include in your stories. And there's a lot of granular details, plans, imagery, like, but what do you want to get from an architect and how do you want to get it?
Yeah, yeah. Great question. I'm actually on the opposite spectrum of Catie, and I wish I had 25, 50 people in my inbox every day. I maybe get five a week. And so, like I said, I live a lot on the plans and the site plans and the applications that go into the system. For me, I think with social media, anything super visual, similar to like what Vanessa was saying, when companies kind of align themselves really well with their project and want to show that visual or show what the project, that voice that their project has, that's super powerful. But for me, it's the details. How much money is it going to cost? What's the community impact? And why is it important? Everything they both said, whether it's the new building tools, the relationships, all that stuff tracks over to social media as well. And give me as much as possible. Give me everything you have, and I kind of take that, and that's what I kind of mold into a post.
does everything that you work on, I mean, obviously you're working before projects oftentimes are created. So you're in a little bit of that space of things are being planned. How much do you produce and then things change? How do you handle it when the project goes through iterations? You know, you've announced something, done a video, you've highlighted a project that's coming, but then the projects invariably change. Does that affect you, the way you cover this in any way?
Definitely. Since I live so much off that permit list, like I was talking about, I tend to make I get the post in the morning, and by the afternoon is usually when I produced it and had everything put out for it. So I try to get the information as soon as I get it, it's a post. It's out there. That way I can kind of avoid that change and those changes that happen. And later on, what I can do is reformat those materials to fit the updates. So whenever what happens is I usually post something, a team sees it, and then I can reach out to them later on and be like, "Do you have any updated information?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, everything you had before is different now, or all this has changed. So let's make sure you have the right stuff." And for me, it's just saying like, "Okay, cool. I'm gonna make a post, and it's gonna get in front of these people." And they're like, "Yeah, here's your stuff." And I'm like, "Great, more, please."
And what trends are you seeing these days? Obviously, trends in architecture, urbanism, development. Like, what's generating the most engagement right now? Like, I'm just thinking about our architects watching this or listening in or reading a post later about this. Like, who's working on something that you're like, oh, if only they knew. This is exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah, there's a affordable housing going in, and God, I'm blanking on the name right now, but it's going in, and the design around it is very unique and different from what I think a lot of affordable housing looks like, where there's this battle that I think a lot of developers and people who work in urban growth, where you're trying to have a project on a timeline and get through permitting and all those things that come along with like the no's before you get a yes, right? So that's so often that affordable housing looks like a box with certain colors and certain things. When you see this project, it just looks different. I think it and I know that's a challenge, and that's something as the community try to work through. I think will change as we continue to move forward with unique designs. But this project is so cool because I think it just like pulls to the eye where, oh, like I would want to live there. I think that would be something I wouldn't be involved in. Not just like, okay, I can go buy another box in a box. So
Yeah.
it it is the design, it's the uniqueness, or even just the way that people are going about creating the space. What like I said earlier, the unique materials or a unique approach. And even sometimes the biggest thing is the people who push back against the city and say, you know what, like you might have your rules and your design things, but we're willing to go through the process. And this is why we want to go through the process because it's important to the community.
Well, and hopefully you talk about the just normal boxes. I mean, hopefully we're helping. My colleague Nicholas Remus, our advocacy and program director there for all the basically the policy that goes through. He and a really great team of volunteers on various committees at the AIA Colorado last year legislatively helped pass the single stair reform. So ideally, the things that you're getting here in the future, our membership is actively working to update that and give you more interesting designs. I think that's something everybody's excited about. So, okay, kind of going along with that. I mean, at what stages of products design or project design or construction do you want information? Obviously, we're getting a little bit of timeline inference here between all the three of you who've presented so far, but when do you want to find out about things?
Any major milestone I would say is important for us, groundbreakings, uh, ribbon cuttings, any of that. But more importantly, when you start putting something on site, when you start putting a fence up, when you start putting any kind of movement where someone in the community is going to be like, what is that? Please send it to me because people are going to ask me in my DMs what's going on. And that's kind of the second fastest of what we do, trying to build out a map that's way more accessible for people to see like what's being built, how it's being built, who's building it, and why it's being built. So for me, please, like anytime you have something like moving on site, dirt's moving, a fence is going up, a sign's going up, please send it my way. I'm very interested in knowing.
It can be a little incentive for architects during their CA time to be a voice in your ear about the changes going on and what's up. So cool. Thank you
Yes.
very much, Parker. Obviously, everybody check out these videos, Developing Denver. We'll come back to some more conversation here in a minute with you. I want to move to Bryant Palmer of Oh Hey Creative. So Oh, hey, what's up? Thank you for joining us. You work in public relations. So we've heard from three different outlets that receive stories. You're oftentimes always the link between where the story moves and it travels. So tell us about what that's like.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I've sent pitches to all three of these publications that are represented here today. Yeah, so our basic job is to help the businesses we work with figure out what stories they have that are really interesting, figure out what media outlets might be interested in those stories, and then shepherd that process of identifying the stories, putting them together in a really compelling and creative way, and then finding writers and reporters and editors who would be interested in telling those stories. That's really what we do.
That's awesome and a good overview for people who are sort of like PR. I kind of know what it is, but like, trying to figure out a bit more of what PR means. So how do you determine whether a project has, publication potential? Like you're going to have a conversation with an architect about a project. Like what are the kind of things you're listening? Obviously, as you get to know them and their firm, but about the work itself, what's on your radar screen?
Yeah, I mean, we when we first work with a new partner, whether it's an agency or a sort of single project, one of the first things we do is a deep onboarding to figure out everything we can about the project. Right, we want to know all the ins and outs, so we can figure out what those stories are. I'd say that just about every project is worthy of a story and has publication potential. Um, One of our jobs is to figure out what outlets make sense for that project. And there's a huge range these days, especially. I think of old school PR as like writing a press release and sending it to a newspaper or a magazine. But Parker's a great example of a new media platform that's not a magazine or a newspaper, but still has a huge audience that's really significant. So we follow all those and try to figure out which ones make sense for each of our partners. In terms of what we look for, anything, just like everyone else has said, anything interesting about the project, whether that means something really beautiful, something really impactful on a community. I think it was Catie's example of a neighbor who maybe told a story to a developer that changed the process. We look for stories like that all the time.
So when you, in an idealized state, you're working with a firm, likely you're meeting monthly or biweekly or something, and you're learning about what they're working on. What are those kind of meetings like? How granular do you get? Like, let's get into the gears of it because
Sure.
you're entrenching with the firm to learn about who they are so that their stories can reach Vanessa, can reach Catie, and can reach Parker, as well as a host of other sort of outlets. So like if you don't mind, share a little bit of the secret sauce. Like, what are you thinking about when you're
Sure.
walking in there?
Yeah, our goal is to establish long-term relationships with our clients. I often use the word partner more than I use the word client because our goal is to become a real partner for those businesses. And I tell people all the time that PR is a long game. You don't hire a PR agency and work with them for 1 month and get a ton of results. Um, Part of the process is getting to know one another and working over time to help get the stories of your project or your agency or your firm out into the world. PR is also very much about relationships. The relationships that I build with reporters and writers and editors are really important because if Catie's getting 50 emails a day, I want to make sure she's going to open mine, and she's going to open mine if we have a good relationship, right? If we work together, if I've sent her stories that are actually interesting, if I send her 10 pitches in a row that don't fit the kind of work she does at all, she's going to be a lot less likely to pay attention to my 11th pitch. So building relationships with folks like that is really important. Um, in terms of the sort of granular nitty gritty, we do a big onboarding at the beginning, figure out like what our PR strategy is going to be over the next 6 months or over the next year. And then, my team, we map out what that looks like and then present it back to the client after that initial meeting and say, here's what I think we should be working on and focusing on over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. Um, Ideally, they say, yes, that's great, and start giving us the information that we can help to build out those stories. Sometimes they're like, well, maybe we should go in a different direction this way. And we have that conversation and sort of figure out what our approach is. Then we put together the materials that we need. That can be press releases, like we mentioned. Um, this work is visual largely. Every outlet has visual components to it. And so you really need great assets. Um, this happens more with the restaurants we work with than it does with the architecture related projects we work on. But sometimes we'll start with someone who doesn't have assets at all. And so we emphasize the importance of getting really great quality imagery. And then we build a digital press kit. And if you're not working with a PR agency and you're doing this on your own, one piece of advice I can give is to make sure you have an online place that's easy to access where people can find visual assets for your project. I would throw a fact sheet in there too, so they have all the information they need in a really easy to access place.
Yeah, so like a press
That was a
kit.
long answer, John. Sorry.
No, no, it's awesome. I'm trying to think about which thread to actually grab because you presented a
Right.
lot. I think it's fantastic. So maybe this one. What should firms realistically expect from media coverage? And I'll ask you because you can be the honest ombudsman here. When they come to you and you work on a story and you send it to Catie or Vanessa or Parker or any other outlet, and they're hoping for the Wall Street Journal to put on the front page, but like realistically, what does this look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure this isn't a beloved answer, but it really varies from project to project. Um, we we've done work with One River North, which is a really well-known building in Denver, and I knew from the very beginning that that project was going to get national and international press. Right, the design was so distinct. It had a world-renowned firm behind it in Matt Architects, and so it was really easy to say this is going to get a lot of buzz. Um, we work with some multifamily rental properties around town that are cool but don't have such an eye striking design. And so with those projects, we um, we tell our clients, look, we're going to look for angles that might get outside of Colorado attention, but our main focus is going to be on Colorado media outlets that are going to care about this building. Um, I think one of those examples is that we worked with a property that had car sharing as a component of its amenities for residents. And so I thought, okay, this is pretty unusual in terms of what you'd offer residents who live in a rental property. So we put together a press release for that and got some national coverage for it. It just varies wildly from project to project. But one of the jobs of an agency or a PR professional is to help you identify what those sort of storylines are and then find the right people to pitch them to.
So when a firm is looking for someone like you or someone who is in the public relations world, what are the kind of things they should be looking for to hire someone like you in this sort of world? What's like a checklist of things that an architect should have in their brain? Because I'm thinking about architects who are solopreneurs all the way to kind of mid-sized firms. Maybe marketing budget is something. Obviously, it's going to be after other expenses. So that this
Mm-hmm.
turns into one of those moments where I would always argue they should be prioritizing spending on marketing, but that's a tough ask. And especially as projects come and go, maybe you lose a huge project, maybe you're riding the coattails of a few big wins, but like how do they evaluate someone and how do they prioritize the investment in something like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the very beginning, you think about vibes, as wild as that sounds. What's the tone of this person you're talking to or the agency you're talking to? What does their website look like? Does it seem like it might be a good fit? And then I think you ask some really specific questions. Um, what kind of work have you done in this field? Um, what are a couple of examples of a project that you're really proud of representing? Someone in my business should be able to say, well, here's something we did that was really helpful and useful that's relevant to you as a potential client. Um, and then I'd ask them about timing. Timing is really important, and you want to be forthright about how long do you think it's going to take for us to work together until we see the kind of results that that you need. I think that's really important too.
And as someone who's thinking of hiring someone in your field, like what's a good I mean, is this something that every firm should have a PR representative for, or is there a time in the the life cycle of a firm when they need to start really thinking about this? Like, when's the right time for someone to be like, is it just per project? They get that one lightning rod moment and they're like, all right, this is the one that's going to get us a bunch of press and it's going to help us grow? Or how do they approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think part of that depends on the scope and scale of the firm we're talking about. If it's a solopreneur or a big firm with 20 employees. Um, Generally speaking, though, I think, exploring whether a PR partner makes sense is worth doing from the jump. Um, Even if you're a solopreneur who's working on projects, I think having a conversation with a PR professional or two and getting some feedback about what they see as potentially helpful for your business is worthwhile. I'll talk to anybody for 30 minutes or an hour about what their PR needs might be and where I think those could go. And I think most agencies, most people who do the work that I do would do the same thing. Having that conversation can be really helpful. Um, like I said earlier, a lot of PR work is relationship based. So having a partner long term can be really helpful. We have some clients that we do contract work for over certain periods of time. So we'll do a 4 month stint here with the understanding that next year we're going to do another 4 month stint. And that's particularly for smaller companies that can't necessarily invest in a monthly retainer for years in a row, but do have some stories worth telling in a more condensed time frame. Um, and there's some bigger companies that will do that as well, and others that won't. So I think having conversations and figuring out what makes sense for your particular firm or agency is worthwhile.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
That did. That's great. And that's a fantastic, I'm going to call it an overview, but yeah. So I want to move a little bit and transition us. Thank you very much, all four of you, for sharing a bit about your world. It's super fascinating, obviously. If anybody who's on this call has a question, drop it in the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat and I'm going to open up questions for the group here. Um, so when I think about, and this is okay, let's move. I'm looking at a question I want to ask. And what are the opportunities that architects are missing right now? And what advice do you have for architects seeking to gain coverage? So, could be a little negative, I get it, but that's okay. It's a safe space. When the four of you see this profession and see the people in Colorado trying to get work, what are they doing wrong and where are the opportunities?
I could say something which I think confuses a lot of people, which is just because you won an award doesn't mean it's a story. That is something that we run into a lot. And so the advice I would give is if you won an award, have great pictures of whatever you created that got the award, and be willing or able to talk about, the community impact. This won this award. Here's why you should care as someone who lives in Denver and maybe isn't in the industry space, because a lot of awards are, you know, pretty niche to industries. We have the same thing in the journalism industry. Um, and so I think when you are putting out press releases or wanting attention related to awards, that would be my tip is like be willing to talk more about the project that got you the award and, have a statement about why that project is impactful for the community beyond that it won something. Yeah.
It's like I won this award and this is why it's interesting to the community because
Yes,
like fill in
exactly.
the rest of that sentence. Okay.
Totally.
That's something that's what's an opportunity that architects are missing? Maybe that says a little bit of a fill in of like what part of a story can they occupy they're not currently occupying.
I was going to say that that telling the why and kind of explaining some of the things that I come across that I find very interesting is when outside firms outside of Denver, because I follow across all across the nation, is when they're explaining the process behind what they're building and not just like maybe putting materials on a photo down on a carousel, but actually like going into the explanation in a video or explaining why a design might look or feel a certain way or why they might go in that direction on their own socials, on their own places, because then I'm going to want to tell that same story, and it's just going to be another voice telling the same story in another way. So, um, it's more like when they get a really hold of that and they're really showing that off. I get so interested in like, okay, cool. Now I understand why it might be designed at this, with a single staircase, or it might be designed with this look in mind. So finding those things on your own, and then outlets will also, like me, will come looking for you and say, okay, I want to feature this project that you're working on because I've seen so many things about it.
Great. Evan Milgram, fantastic photographer here joining us today. He asked a question for you, Brian, about photography. Um, how do you go about judging the photography of a project, and what's your process with clients when it comes to its creation?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, we like photography that looks professional, that has a point of view, but that is relaying the story that we're trying to tell, if that makes sense. We work with a lot of photographers, and there's a line between having a point of view as a photographer, but also sharing work that represents a project really, really well. Um, and what might look like beautiful art maybe isn't necessarily the right fit for modern in Denver, or even more so the Denver Post, right? Who just wants photographs that are facts, if that makes sense. Um, so that's really important to us. And then in terms of finding, we've got a roster of photographers we worked with before. Some we haven't, but whose info we have bookmarked. I just keep a spreadsheet for OHA that has photographers on it that we can refer to clients and say, hey, you need good photography. This what you sent us is not going to work. Here's a list of people you can talk to, and then sort of let them do that on their own. Every now and then, clients will hire us to handle photography themselves, and then we reach out to people. Usually, it's people we've worked with before.
And Vanessa, I've had conversations with you and with William Logan about photography for modern in Denver. It just being it's such a crucial part of the storytelling. How do you guys specifically view photography as you're putting together a piece?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Bryant just said about, kind of towing the line when it comes to like subjectivity and um yeah, having a styled and staged space that's not too that still remains somewhat neutral is huge. And then also we tend to work with the same handful of photographers for this reason, both because their work is reliable and consistent. They kind of know the modern in Denver angle usually, and then they even talk to us sometimes in advance of a shoot because architects, as many on this call probably know, it's a huge investment to hire a photographer. So making sure that it's going to kind of hit those media notes is something that you don't want to leave out of this big investment.
All right, so
Nice. Thank you.
yeah, I've invited the four of you on partly because I've had conversations with each of you in the past and we've interacted, but okay, so take our work hats off and you think about other publications across the state of Colorado. Christy was asking specifically about publications like outside of Denver, but in general, I feel like the four of you are a fantastic mix of people who can provide perspective on this. What other periodicals, news outlets jump to mind in the state of Colorado that you would recommend architects kind of keep an eye on and reach out to when they have projects that come along? Maybe this is a question for you, Bryant, specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you first look at where the project's taking place. If you're building something in Breckenridge or Aspen or Durango, you look for the local outlets that cover news in those places. And then I think beyond that, you look at um, regional outlets as well. I sent a pitch a couple of days ago to um, Mountain Woman magazine. I think was the name of it. It was new to me. So you just look for those. I use a service that helps me find outlets and places outside of Metro Denver where I mostly work. As a PR agency, that's a really important tool for us to use. Um, and then I think you look beyond traditional media as well. Um, the work that Parker does with developing Denver is really phenomenal. There are um, there are similar people doing similar work, probably not as successfully as he does, but in other places, right? There are people in the mountains who are covering things like art and architecture. And so you try to find those and pitch them as well.
What's the best way for each of the four of you for someone to essentially establish a relationship? You don't know them, they haven't contacted you yet, Is it an email? Is it say hello at an event? What's the best way for an architect to step out of their comfort zone and start to get into your space a little bit?
I'd say for me, an email is great, linking to your website. And then I'm always happy to have coffee with people who live here locally or jump on a phone call for 30 minutes to learn more about you.
Yeah, I would say about the same. And what I always tell people is once I meet you and I know you, even if I am telling you no, I'm actually going to email you to tell you no instead of just not replying. So I think, yeah, email me and happy to chat and we can go over kind of what our process looks like and what, milestones and things like that we look for.
For me, same email. And I'm a local. I live here in Denver, so I'm happy to always meet in different places or on site to check it out myself. And unfortunately, I am a one-man band on my side, so if I'm slow to email, I am very sorry in advance, but I promise I will get back to you.
No, it's good. Okay, so I have a little hypothetical here. This will be, I think, the last question, unless someone else jumps in the chat here. But let's say as a firm, maybe a solopreneur to a couple of architects working in a firm, they have a modest budget and they're looking to raise their profile over the next 12 months. Where do you think they should spend their time and energy? Where should they focus in terms of growing their outreach, in terms of growing the stories that they share with the wider world? So they don't have a marketing person, they don't have someone in-house who handles this. They are themselves going to start working on this. What would be your advice to them?
I was going to jump in right away and say that instead of coming like as much as I want to advocate for my own business, I think going to someone like Bryant or finding someone that fits in your realm that knows your business, knows the outlets, and knows how to get that reach. That's where your dollar is going to get spent the most. I mean, there's going to be a budget that comes along with what sometimes Bryant does and working with even us, and that's okay. Like, but we want to work with people and Bryant and those companies. They know how to get into the right people with the right budgets and right away get you to the right places.
Thanks, Parker. I mean, I will say that, some of I really appreciate that. It sounds self-serving, but I spend all my time thinking about these things and working with people throughout the sort of media landscape so that you as a business owner don't have to. I don't know that many small business owners who have, you know, dozens of hours every week to dedicate to marketing their own business. It's really hard and really time consuming and probably not your area of expertise. So, that's a vote for finding someone who is passionate about that sort of thing and who spends all their time. Um, if you can't do that, if you don't want to do that for some reason, um, I think you've got to give yourself a boot camp on marketing and PR as best you can. Um, but I'll have to think about where I would send you to do that.
I would say if you really have like very, very little budget, the best thing on my end is if you make a contact page on your website that has an email that goes directly to someone, because then, it's not going to help you necessarily generate interest, but if, Parker or myself or someone else looking at it comes across a project in the permitting system that you are working on or something tied to your company that, oh, I haven't heard of that company. What is that? If I can't find an email address on your website, it's a lot harder for me to reach you. So maybe that's like a very basic, easy step that hopefully wouldn't cost you much that I think does cost people opportunities sometimes, just if you're not easy to reach when the time comes around.
Yeah, and adding to that, Catie, I think if you're working with a really small budget, just doing what we were just talking about, which is making relationships and, being out there, getting to events, making connections, that sort of thing that costs you very little in terms of money, but can really help kind of position you in the ecosystem.
I love it. Thank you, guys. If anybody has any last minute questions, drop them in there. But I want to thank the four of you for joining us today. I learned a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun. I hope it was for everybody else as well. We're going to be doing some more similar type of events later this year. One of which is about pitching, about winning the work, about relationship building with developers and those who are in a different part of the same sort of world in terms of getting projects up off the ground, literally. So hopefully these conversations can help us as a community of architects grow our businesses and grow our influence within the community. But thank you, Parker. Thank you, Catie. Thank you, Bryant. Thank you, Vanessa. Anybody else on the call, if you have questions, feel free to email me, Jon, Jon, at aiacolorado.org, and we'll keep this conversation going. But yeah, this is the end of the hour, so I want to be conscious of everyone's time. And again, thank you guys very much for participating, and thank you for folks who joined. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Jon. Really appreciate it. Take care, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.